It was the kind of marriage that nobody expected. Two strangers, brought together not by romance but by tradition. Grace had never met Matthew before, and he had never so much as heard her name. Yet, here they were, standing side by side, exchanging vows under the watchful eyes of their families, bound by a promise neither of them fully understood. In that moment, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden glow over their small town, something unexpected flickered in their hearts. It wasn't love, not yet, but perhaps the beginning of it, a quiet hope that, despite everything, they could find something more. In a quiet town where everyone knew each other, there lived a young boy and girl who didn't know one another, though their lives were about to change forever. The boy, Matthew, came from a family that valued hard work, and he grew up helping his father in their small shop. The girl, Grace, was from a family of simple farmers. They lived in a modest house on the outskirts of the town, where they grew vegetables and cared for animals. One day, the two families met by chance. Matthew's family needed fresh vegetables for their shop, and Grace's family was one of their suppliers. After some polite conversations, Grace's father and Matthew's father realized they had much in common. They both valued tradition, family, and hard work. And so, they thought about uniting their families in a deeper way. Grace had never met Matthew before, nor had Matthew met Grace. They lived their own lives, busy with work and family duties. However, one day, their parents called them together. There was a serious discussion around the table about how a union between their families would benefit both sides. At first, neither Grace nor Matthew knew what to say. It was an unusual idea, marrying someone they barely knew. But their parents assured them that this was how things used to be done, that love would grow in time, and that the bond between two good families was more important than any fleeting emotions. Nervously, they agreed to go along with the plan. Soon the preparations began for a simple wedding. The ceremony was small but heartfelt, with only close family and friends in attendance. They exchanged vows, and though they barely knew each other, there was something pure about the moment. The promise they made to support and love one another became a foundation, not built on years of memories but on the hope of creating them together. After the wedding, life was not immediately easy. Matthew continued working at the shop, but the income was modest. Grace, used to farm life, had to adjust to living in town, where everything felt strange to her. They lived in Matthew's parents' home, where space was tight and privacy was rare. For the first few weeks, they struggled to communicate. Matthew was shy, unsure of how to approach Grace, and she felt awkward around him too. But over time, as they shared meals, laughed at small things and took walks together in the evening, something began to grow between them. It was slow, but each day they learned a little more about each other. Grace found that Matthew had a gentle sense of humour, and Matthew discovered that Grace was kind and patient. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Matthew confessed, "I never imagined I would marry someone I didn't know, but now I can't imagine my life without you." Grace smiled, feeling warmth in her heart she hadn't expected. "I feel the same," she said quietly. "I thought love had to come before marriage, but maybe it's something we grow into." Just as their love began to blossom, life threw challenges at them. Matthew's father fell ill, and the shop began to struggle. Grace's family was also facing problems on their farm, which meant they couldn't help much financially. Matthew lost his job at the shop when it had to close down, and the young couple was left without an income. The situation forced them to make a difficult decision. After months of living with Matthew's parents, it became clear that they needed to find their own way. They couldn't rely on their families anymore, and there was tension in the house, especially with Matthew's father's health getting worse. One night, after a difficult conversation with Matthew's parents, they knew they had to leave. "We'll manage," Grace said softly to Matthew, even though deep down she was afraid. They found a small old house at the edge of town. It was far from perfect. The roof leaked when it rained, and the windows rattled when the wind blew. But it was theirs. They worked together to fix the house bit by bit. They couldn't afford new furniture, so they used what they could find and borrowed from friends. It wasn't much, but it became their home. Despite their hardships, their love for each other grew stronger. They shared every moment, from the struggles of finding new jobs to the simple joys of cooking dinner together. Matthew found a part-time job at a construction site while Grace started selling handmade crafts at the local market. Their income was small, but they learned to live with less, finding happiness in the little things. One evening after a long day of work, they sat on their old, creaky couch. The light from a single lamp filled the room with a soft glow. Grace leaned her head on Matthew's shoulder. "We've been through so much," she said quietly. "I don't know how we did it." "We did it together," Matthew replied, holding her close, "and that's what matters." It was in these small moments that they realized how deeply they had fallen in love. They didn't have the luxury of expensive vacations or the comfort of a big house, but they had each other. When they were tired, they leaned on one another. When they felt discouraged, they lifted each other up. Years passed, and though they still lived in the same old house, they had built a life they were proud of. Matthew eventually found a stable job, and Grace's crafts became more popular at the market, bringing in a steady income. They didn't become wealthy, but they didn't need to be. Their happiness wasn't measured by money or material things, but by the love they shared. One night, as they lay in bed, Matthew whispered, "I never thought I would love someone this much." Grace smiled in the darkness, reaching for his hand. "Neither did I," she said softly, "but I'm so glad we found our way to each other." As they grew older, new challenges arose. Grace's parents passed away, and Matthew's father followed shortly after. Losing their loved ones was hard, but they found comfort in each other's arms. They had learned that life was full of hardships, but together they could face anything. One day, as they sat in their little garden, surrounded by the plants Grace had carefully tended over the years, Matthew turned to Grace and said, "I wouldn't change a single thing." Grace smiled, her heart full of love. "Neither would I," she replied. "We may not have had the easiest life, but we've had a life filled with love. And that's all that matters." And so, in their small, humble home, surrounded by memories of a life built on unconditional love, they continued their journey together, facing whatever life threw at them with strength, courage, and, most importantly, love.